Good morning. This is Orson Welles speaking. I'd like to read to you an affidavit. I, Isaac Woodard Jr., being duly sworn, do depose and state as follows, that I am 27 years old and a veteran of the United States Army, having served for 15 months in the South Pacific and earned 1 battle star. I was honorably discharged on February 12, 1946, from Camp Gordon, Georgia, at 8:30 p.m. at the Greyhound Terminal, Atlanta, Georgia. While I was in uniform, I purchased a ticket to Winnsboro, South Carolina, and took the bus headed there to pick up my wife to come to New York to see my father and mother. About 1 hour out of Atlanta, the bus driver stopped at a small drugstore. As he stopped, I asked him if he had time to wait for me until I had a chance to go to the restroom. He cursed and said no. When he cursed me, I cursed him back. When the bus got to Aiken, he got off and went and got the police. They didn't give me a chance to explain. The policeman struck me with a billy across my head and told me to shut up. After that, the policeman grabbed me by my left arm and twisted it behind my back. I figured he was trying to make me resist. I did not resist against him. He asked me, was I discharged? And I told him yes. When I said yes, that is when he started beating me with a billy, hitting me across the top of the head. After that, I grabbed his billy and wrung it out of his hand. Another policeman came up and threw his gun on me and told me to drop the billy, or he'd drop me, so I dropped the billy. After I dropped the billy, the second policeman held his gun on me while the other one was beating me. He knocked me unconscious. After I commenced to come to myself, he hollered, "Get up." I started to get up. He started punching me in my eyes with the end of the billy. When I finally got up, he pushed me inside the jailhouse and locked me up. I woke up next morning and could not see. A policeman said, "Let's go up here and see what the judge says." I told him that I could not see how to come out. I was blind. He said, "Feel your way out." He said I'd be all right after I washed my face. He led me to the judge, and after I told the judge what happened, he said, "We don't have that kind of stuff down here." Then the policeman said, he wrung my billy out of my hand, and I told him if he didn't drop it, I'd drop him. That's how I knew it was the same policeman as had beat my eyes out. After that, the judge spoke and said, "I fine you $50 for 30 days in the road." And I said I'd pay the $50, but I did not have the $50 at the time. So the policeman said, "You have some money there in your wallet." He took my wallet and took out all I had. That was a total of $40, and took $4 from my watch pocket. I had a check for $694.73, which was my mustering out pay and soldier's deposit. He said to me, "Can you see how to sign this check? You have a government check." I told him no, sir. So he gave it back to me after that. Took me back and locked me up in the jail. The policeman did, and I stayed in there for a while, and after a few minutes, he came and asked me if I wanted a drink of whiskey. If I took a drink of whiskey, he said I'd feel better. I told him no, sir. Didn't care for any. About 5:30 that evening, they took me to the Veterans Hospital in Columbia, South Carolina. One of the contact men came around one day and said to me they were going to take out a pension for me. I believe that the doctor who cared for me was named Dr. Clarence. I told him what had happened to me. He made no comment, but told me I should join a blind school. Sworn to me, this 23rd day of April, 1946. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I had that affidavit in my pocket a few hours before dawn. When I left off worrying about this broadcast long enough for coffee at an all-night restaurant, I found myself joined at the table by a stranger. A nice, soft-spoken, well-meaning, well-mannered stranger he was. He told me a joke. He thinks it's a joke. I'm going to repeat it, but not for your amusement. I earnestly hope that nobody listening will laugh. This is the joke. It seems there was a white man who came on business to a southern town, it could be Aiken, South Carolina, and found he couldn't get a bed in any of the good hotels. He went to the bad hotels and finally the flop houses, but there was no room for him in any of the inns reserved for white folks in that southern city. So at last, in desperation, he applied at a Negro hotel where he was accepted with a proviso that he would consent to share a double room with another guest. With rueful gratitude, this white man paid his bill, left a call for early in the morning. He rested well, quite undisturbed by the proximity of the sleeping colored man beside him, and was awakened at the hour of his request. After breakfast, he left the railway station where he boarded his appointed train, but the conductor would not let him into any of the regular coaches. The man was told quite rudely to go where he belonged, the Jim Crow car. The hero of this funny story allowed he hadn't washed in the morning, that the dust of travel must be responsible for the conductor's grievous social miscalculation. He went to the washroom. He started to clean his hands. They were black, an even hue of black. Then he looked into the mirror. His face was the same color. He not only looked darker than white, he was quite visibly a Negro. A great oath precedes the final line, which is presumed to be the funny part of this little anecdote. I know what's happened to the next words of the man. It's very simple. They woke up the wrong man. I left the teller of this tale in the coffee shop, but I found I couldn't leave the tale itself. Like the affidavit I read to you at the start of the broadcast, it seems to have become a permanent part of my mental luggage. I sketched in my imagination a sequel to the stranger's funny joke. I saw the man of business who'd gone to bed, a white man, getting into an argument with the conductor. I saw a policeman boarding the train at the next station and taking the man of business out on the platform and beating the eyes out of his head because the man thought he should be treated with the same respect he had received the day before when he was white. I saw men at the police station trying to make him take a drink so that the medical authorities could testify that he was drunk. I saw the man of business bleeding in his cell, reaching out with sightless hands through unseen bars, gesturing for help that could not ever come. And I heard his explanation echoing down the stone hallways of the jail. I know what's happened. It's very simple. They woke up the wrong man. Now, it seems the officer of the law who blinded the young Negro boy of the affidavit has not been named. The boy saw him while he could still see, but of course he had no way of knowing what particular policeman it was who brought the justice of Dachau to Aiken, South Carolina. He was just another white man with a stick who wanted to teach a Negro boy a lesson, to show a Negro boy where he belonged, in the darkness. Till we know more about him, for just now, we'll call the policeman Officer X. He might be listening to this. I hope so. Officer X, I'm talking to you. Officer X, they woke up the wrong man. That somebody else, that man sleeping there, is you. The you that God brought into the world, all innocent of hate. A paid-up resident member of the Brotherhood of Man. Yes, unbelievably enough, that's you, Officer X. You, still asleep. That you could have been anything. It could have gone to the White House when it grew up. It could have gone to heaven when it died. But they woke up the wrong man. They finally came for him in the blank gray of dawn. As in the death house, they come for the condemned, but without prayers. They came with instructions, the accumulated ignorance of the feudal South. And with this peculiar briefing, they called Cain for another day of the devil's work, while Abel slept. Wash your hands, Officer X. Wash them well. Scrub and scour. You won't blot out the blood of a blinded war veteran. Nor yet the color of your skin, your own skin. You'll never, never, never change it. Wash your hands, Officer X. Wash a lifetime. You'll never wash away that leprous lack of pigment, the guilty pallor of the white man. We invite you to luxuriate in secrecy. It will be brief. Go on. Suckle your anonymous moment while it lasts. You're going to be uncovered. We will blast out your name. We'll give the world your given name, Officer X. Yes, and your so-called Christian name. It's going to rise out of the filthy deep like the dead thing it is. We're going to make it public with the public scandal you dictated but failed to sign. We pause now for a word from the philosophers. A short reminder regarding the matter of payment and cost. Nothing is paid back. That does not happen, not on earth. A favor cannot be paid back, neither can a wrong. We say a criminal pays for his crime when we lock him up, that a murderer pays for his murder when the state murders him, but really the state is hiding an unsightly object. Society is merely sweeping its dirt under the carpet. We may sometimes manage to cure the thing called crime, but the man called a criminal is never punished. He can be inconvenienced or tormented or done away with, but he cannot pay for what he has done. If the ledger is ever balanced, it is not by him, but by some other man having nothing to do with him. It is balanced by deeds of virtue, by unrelated good works. The evildoer's agony doesn't show on the books. Only that fiction known to us as money can be paid back. The true debt, the debt of a friend to a friend or a foe to a foe, outlives the principles involved. So much for payment. Price. That's something else. There's a price for everything. There's nothing that does not have its cost. Joy and inspiration and mere pleasure have a market value precisely computed in terms of their opposites. The cost of youth is age. The cost of age is death. Do you want love? The cost of love is independence. You want to be independent, do you? Then pay the price and know what it is to be alone. Your mother paid for you with pain. Nothing in this living world is free. The free air costs you the life-consuming effort of breath. Freedom itself is priced at the rate of the citizenship it earns and holds. What does it cost to be a Negro? In Aiken, South Carolina, it cost a man his eyes. What does it cost to wear over your skeleton the pinkish tint officially described as white? In Aiken, South Carolina, it cost a man his soul. Officer X may languish in jail. It's unlikely, but it's possible that he'll serve as long a term as a Negro would serve in Aiken, South Carolina, for stealing bread. But Officer X will never pay for the 2 eyes he beat out of the soldier's head. How can you essay the gift of sight? What are they quoting today for 1 eye? An eye for an eye? A literal reading of this Mosaic law spells out again only the blank waste of vengeance. We've told Officer X that he will be dragged out of hiding. We've promised him a most unflattering glare of publicity. We're going to keep that promise. We will build our own police lineup to line up this reticent policeman with the killers, the lunatics, the beast men, all the people of society's zoo where he belongs. If he's listening to this, let him listen well. Officer X, after I've found you out, I'll never lose you. If they try you, I'm going to watch the trial. If they jail you, I'm going to wait for your first day of freedom. You won't be free of me. I want to see who's waiting for you at the prison gates. I want to know who will acknowledge that they know you. I'm interested in your future. I will take careful note of all your destinations. Assume another name, and I will be careful that the name you would forget is not forgotten. I will find means to remove from you all refuge, Officer X. You can't get rid of me. We have an appointment, you and I, and only death can cancel it. Who am I? A masked avenger from the comic books? No, sir, merely an inquisitive citizen of America. I admit that nothing on this inhabited earth is capable of your chastisement. I'm simply but quite actively curious to know what will become of you. Your fate cannot affect the boy in the country hospital for the blind, but your welfare is a measure of the welfare of my country. I cannot call it your country. How long will you get along in these United States? Which of the states will still consent to get along with you? Where stands the sun of common fellowship? When will it rise over your dark country? When will it be noon in Georgia? I must know where you go, Officer X, because I must know where the rest of us are going with our American experiment. Into bankruptcy or into that serene tomorrow, that plenteous garden the blind soldier hoped for when he had his eyes and with eyes opened went to war. We want a word to lighten his darkness. You're sorry for him? He rejects your pity. You're ashamed? He doesn't care. We want to tell him soon that all America is ashamed of you. If there's room for pity, you can have it, for you're far more blind than he. He had eyes to see and saw with them, made out, if nothing else, at least a part of the shape of human dignity. And this is not a little thing, but you had eyes to see and you have never seen. He has the memory of light, but you were born in the pit. He cannot grow new eyes to open the world again for his poor bruised head. Never. No. The only word we can share the martyr with to carry him from the county hospital to the county grave is word concerning your eyes, Officer X. Your eyes, remember, were not gouged away. Only the lids are closed. You might raise the lids. You might just try the wild adventure of looking. You might see something. It might be a simple truth. One of those truths held to be self-evident by our founding fathers and by most of us. If we should ever find you bravely blinking at the sun, we'll know then that the world is young after all, that chaos is behind us and not ahead. Then there will be shouting of trumpets to rouse the dead at Gettysburg. A thunder of cannon will declare the tidings of peace, and all the bells of liberty will laugh out loud in the streets to celebrate goodwill towards all men. The new blind can hear. It'd be very good if they could hear the news that the old blind can finally see. Then, Officer X, you'll find that you can wash off what should be washed, and it will be said of you, yes, even you, that they awakened the right man. Now it's time to say goodbye. Please let me come to call again. Next week, same time. Until then, I remain as always obediently yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, the American Broadcasting Company invites you to be with us again next Sunday afternoon at 1:15 o'clock over most of these very same stations, when we shall again hear from Mr. Orson Welles. This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
Hello, this is Orson Welles speaking. On his way to the peace conference in Paris, Mr. Clement Attlee, the Prime Minister of Britain, remembered a cartoon he'd seen 25 years before in the London Daily Herald. It showed the big four of 1919, Wilson and Lloyd George, Clemenceau and Orlando, walking out of the peace conference of 1919, having written the Treaty of Versailles, and Clemenceau had stopped the others. Curious, the old lion was saying. Curious. I seem to hear a child crying. The cartoon, Mr. Attlee remembered, showed a child, a weeping child, labeled in a bitterly wonderful moment of prophecy, Class of 1940. We're very glad that the Prime Minister of Britain had not forgotten the cartoon. We hope he never does. We suggest that a few copies be struck off for distribution among the peacemakers of 1946. Mr. Molotov and Mr. Burns would be well advised to decorate their shaving mirrors with that picture of the weeping child. We cannot think of a better way for them to start their day. Stalin's Yalta promise to democratize Eastern Europe was broken in Bucharest the week after it was made. The Soviet Empire is already reaching from Finland to the borders of Greece, and the grand alliance of the so-called democracies of the West has long since ceased to be a mere diplomatic threat. As the politicos haggle away another summer on such issues as the two-thirds voting procedure, that grand alliance looms over the arguments as a blunt political fact. The United States and the Soviet Union, it turns out, are going to stand together on the broad question of the veto. Borders will be disputed, but the main border is past dispute. The borderline of a divided world shows black enough for the least observant of the observers to spell it out of the headlines. Blocks versus majorities, the big powers versus the small. These are matters for 1,000 editorials today, but most folks who follow the news, even in the most casual sandwich of comic strips, know what time of day it is. And perhaps even the diplomats have taken note that this, in very truth, is the 11th hour. Take me to the Luxembourg Palace, said the newspaper man, according to his own dispatch. To the palace, of course, said the cab driver, where you're all busy preparing for the next war. Collective security, the one world of Roosevelt and Wilkie and Litvinov, are the ashes of dreams. Empires expand and shrink. Borders are pushed back and forth over the hapless heads of the peoples of Europe. The Russian half of our poor little globe is an armed camp. America has defaulted as champion of the freedoms. In foreign policy, Roosevelt's party is playing the Republican game, and Britain's Labour Party is dancing the old dance of death, while the old Tory idea, the Tory ignorance and Tory cowardice, call the tune. Curious. I seem to hear a child crying. No, I'm afraid the Palace of Luxembourg is more likely to be remembered in ages hence as the place where Tom Paine wrote The Age of Reason. Along the Potomac, the dawn rose quiet and cool. Around the floor of the Senate, tired colored men were bent over the worn carpet, picking up the refuse left behind by the 79th Congress of the United States. Among the Senate porters, more than one must have muttered, "Good riddance." And as he swept thoughtfully beneath the seats of Senator Bilbo and Senator Eastland, the gentleman from Mississippi, he must have dreamt a happy little dream of someday putting that broom of his to more effective service in the hygiene of the United States Senate. This Sunday in Washington is as dead a Sunday as was ever known in Zion, Illinois. Even the White House is empty. Mr. Harry Truman is down in Missouri in the hopes of stifling a human roadblock named Roger Slaughter, a congressman from Kansas City. Some people think Mr. Truman ought to stay out of local politics. Others think he never should have left local politics. State Department's like a tomb. Mr. Jimmy Burns is in Paris. Mr. Dean Acheson sits in his Maryland farm today, licking a few wounds. The Undersecretary took a bad beating during the last few hours of the 79th Congress. Well, maybe he didn't take them personally. You and I and the family next door, we're all a little black and blue. For one thing, it was a little matter of a world court. Oregon Senator Morse moved that the Senate vote a treaty accepting jurisdiction of the new world court in all international cases. In other words, the treaty said, we will not only join the court, but will abide by its decisions. We will not hold out a veto power on whether or not we would play ball if we thought the decisions would go against us. This veto power is what Burns is opposing in Paris now, and Baruch is fighting in New York. Of all the opponents of the veto power, the most enthusiastic is that triumvirate of statesmen, Tom Connolly, Arthur Vandenberg, and John Foster Dulles. Mr. Dulles, in his wisdom, has decided that he doesn't like the possible compulsory decisions of the World Court. Mr. Dulles, it seems, wants the United States to have a veto power in the court. This, mind you, is the identical Mr. Dulles, who writes those nice long articles in Life magazine calling for war on Russia because the Bolsheviks, those unreasoning savages of the East, refuse in their Oriental ignorance to give up the veto power. This is the same Mr. Dulles who drafts some reservations to the World Court Bill. Reservations. Do you know what that word means, reservations? Does it ring a bell somewhere in the back of your mind? Does it strike an unpleasantly familiar chord in your memory of other peace conferences? Reservations? That's precisely the word used by the Honorable Mr. Henry Cabot Lodge when he fought the League of Nations in 1920. Reservations. He killed a league with reservations. The reservations of Mr. Dulles were rendered up in legislative form to his favorite senator, Mr. Vandenberg. These reservations were introduced in turn by Mr. Vandenberg to the Senate. Against these reservations, Mr. Morse battled with stubborn persistence and a stout heart, but to no avail. Up stands the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Connolly, and backs up a queer, gray, formless object known as bipartisan foreign policy. And the result, we have approved the World Court Treaty with reservations. What does that mean, Daddy? It means we have the veto power. Isn't that nice, Daddy? Does that mean the other countries have the veto power? Certainly not. The veto power is like the atom bomb. It's very dangerous if anybody else has it. Memo for the U.S. Mint. Put a new motto on the penny. In us we trust. Curious. I seem to hear a child crying. What do you say to sending 1,000 American students to every major country of Europe and sending 1,000 of their students here? All those thousands and thousands of young people, multiplied by the friends they're bound to make, ought to make it a little more imperative for the governments of the world to get along together in a sensible climate of good fellowship. I don't mean the students could do it all by themselves, but they could do their bit. Well, there was a bill providing for such a worldwide exchange. Tom Connolly allowed that the $10 million it called for was just another case of foolish spending, but the friends of the bill finally got the elder statesman to see it their way, and it would have been put to a yea or nay if Lister Hill of Alabama hadn't asked the gentleman from Texas if he would yield. Well, Sir Tom yielded, and Lister Hill took off on an hour's oration concerning the defenses of Pearl Harbor. This gave Tom time to talk to some other thinkers and to remember his train reservations home. Tom didn't want to lose those reservations. There goes that word again, reservations. By the time the senator from Alabama finished his address, that fine exchange project was just another matter for the dustbin of the 79th Congress of the United States of America. And yet, you know, out of all this stupid blundering and floundering, this awful mess, more than a few good bills have been born. Congress is a right confusing thing to watch. A fair estimate of any Congress is hard to come by. This 79th Congress, just for example, the same Congress that scuttled full employment, that failed to pass an anti-lynch bill or to destroy the poll tax, is the Congress that surprised even itself and passed Bretton Woods and the United Nations Charter. Yes, the same Congress that went on that strike-breaking binge of recent and unhappy memory, the same Congress that let the OPA wither and die, increased appropriations for the sick and needy, and passed a much better than decent bill for the control of atomic energy. Almost its last accomplishment belongs on the credit side of the ledger. The La Follette-Monroney bill, for which we've beaten a couple of drums in this program, is now law. It reorganizes Congress itself and brings the machinery of lawmaking to a point of efficiency that's almost up to date. Because of this bill, the 80th Congress will find itself in many respects a new kind of organization. And the congressmen of the 80th Congress themselves are going to be a little better paid. That ought to mean that fewer of our representatives will suffer in the future from Mandy May's kind of heart trouble. All in all, we've had a lot of disappointments this year from Washington, but the good word is that our brand of democracy is still in working order and open for business. Last week, I read you an affidavit from a Negro soldier named Isaac Woodard. You remember that he was taken off a bus in South Carolina by a policeman and beaten until he was blinded in both eyes. I have before me a letter from Mr. H. Odell Weeks, who, it seems, is the mayor of the city of Aiken in the state of South Carolina, where, according to the soldier's affidavit, he was blinded. The mayor encloses affidavits of his own, sworn to by the city recorder, by the city chief of police, and by a couple of patrol officers. Now, these gentlemen deny all knowledge of the incident. It is indeed unfortunate, writes Mr. Weeks, and these are his exact words, quote, that you did not fully verify this story before you broadcasted it, unquote. The mayor goes on to say that since my broadcast went out to the nation, and since, according to the affidavits, the locale of the story was wholly untrue, he, the mayor, urges that I have the courage and forthrightness to retract the wrong I have done his city, giving to my own retraction the same emphasis I placed upon the original broadcast. Well, Mr. Weeks, I hardly know how to make affidavits of your city recorder and city policeman as emphatic as Mr. Woodward's in the hospital for the blind. If it turns out to be true that the city of Aiken is blameless of this hideous scandal, it is my duty to make that innocence as public as possible, and I hope to be able to. But I must warn you that denials are never dramatic, and if I'm to say something exciting about Aiken, it will have to be something better than that a Negro boy was never blinded in its streets. I look forward to giving the subject of Aiken all the emphasis it deserves, but I'm bound to fail without some affirmative material. There are thousands of cities where Negro soldiers have not been blinded. I hope it will be my privilege to announce that your city is one of these. But since the broadcast is going to go out, as you put it, to the nation, let's spice up the retraction with a little good news. I won't ask you what the city of Aiken has done for Negro soldiers or for Negroes or for the blind. I'll only ask you if you're willing to join with me in a manhunt. A man dressed as a policeman blinded a discharged veteran. The blinded boy swears that his tormentor told him he came from the Aiken police. It is surely a more urgent matter for you to apprehend this imposter before he commits further outrages in your city's name than it is to exact from a commentator the cold comfort of apology. You'll get the apology when the facts are clear. Until then, you must understand why it must be deferred. After all, Mr. Weeks, I have not only the affidavits of your policeman, I've also the affidavit of the blinded soldier. Working on the meager clue that there is also an Aiken County, I've sent investigators there and to your city who should bring out the truth, unless it is too skillfully hidden. The soldier might easily have made a mistake, but there's a man in a policeman's uniform who made a worse mistake. And all the retractions in the world won't cleanse the name of Aiken till we find that man. I assure you, Mr. Weeks, I do not doubt the word of your police chief, your patrol officers, or your city recorder, but neither do I doubt the word of the blinded Negro boy. His suffering gives his oath a special validity, and I would take it against the Supreme Court and the President of the United States. Let us say he misunderstood what was said to him, or let us say he was lied to. But just saying that isn't enough. Your city's honor is certainly more important than my pride, but honor and pride are piddling trifles beside a pair of eyes. If it is your point that the boy was lied to, it is my point that we must all of us refuse to rest till we've unmasked the liar. If you want me to say that this awful thing did not happen in your city, then there's an American soldier who believes that it did happen in your city. And I cannot forget that. It is to him, Mr. Weeks, that you should address your first and most indignant letters. They will, of course, need to be transcribed in Braille. Now I see my time is just about up. That's all I have to say to you for the moment, Mr. Mayor of Aiken. And you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming to this part of your dial at this part of a Sunday. Please let me join you next week at the same time, and let me hear from you. Your letters are much appreciated. We like reading them on this program. Till next week, then, same time, same station. I remain, as always, obediently yours.
This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
This is Orson Welles. I've spoken these words before, but not on the radio. To be born free is to be born in debt. To live in freedom without fighting slavery is to profiteer. By plane last night, I flew over some parts of our republic where American citizenship is a luxury beyond the means of the majority. I rode comfortably in my plane above a sovereign state or two where fellow countrymen of ours can't vote without the privilege of cash. I bought my breakfast this morning where Negroes may not come except to serve their white brothers. And there I overheard a member of some master race or other tell those who listened that something must be done to suppress the Jews. I have met Southerners who expect and fear a Negro insurrection. I see no purpose in withholding this from general discussion. There may be those within that outcast 10% of the American people who someday will strike back at their oppressors. But to put down that mob, a mob would rise. I'd like to ask, please, who will put down that mob? The scaly dinosaurs of reaction, if indeed they notice what I'm speaking here, will say in their newspapers that I'm a communist. Communist, no otherwise. I'm an overpaid movie producer with pleasant reasons to rejoice, and I do, in the wholesome practicability of the profit system. But surely my right to having more than enough is canceled if I don't use that more to help those who have less. My subject today is the question of moral indebtedness. So I'd like to acknowledge here the debt that goes with ownership. I believe, and this has very much to do with my own notion of freedom, I believe I owe the very profit I make to the people I make it from. If this is radicalism, it comes automatically to most of us in show business, it being generally agreed that any public man owes his position to the public. That's what I mean when I say I'm your obedient servant. It's a debt payable in service and the highest efforts of the debtor. The extension of this moral argument insists that no man owns anything outright since he owns it rent-free. A wedding never bought a wife, and the devotion of his child is no man's for the mere begetting. We must each day earn what we own. A healthy man owes to the sick all that he can do for them. An educated man owes to the ignorant all that he can do for them. A free man owes to the world's slaves all that he can do for them. And what is to be done is more, much more than good works, Christmas baskets, bonuses and tips, and bread and circuses. There is only one thing to be done with slaves: free them. If we can't die in behalf of progress, we can live for it. Progress, we Americans take to mean a fuller realization of democracy. The measure of progress, as we understand it, is the measure of equality enjoyed by all men. We can do something about that. The way our fighting brothers and sisters looked at it, some of them dead as I speak these words, the way they looked at it, we're lucky. And they're right. We're lucky to be alive, but only if our lives make life itself worth dying for. We must be worthy of our luck, or we are damned. Our lives were spared, but this is merely the silliest of accidents, unless we put the gift of life to the hard employments of justice. If we waste that gift, we won't have anywhere to hide from the indignation of history. I want to say this. The morality of the auction block is out of date. There is no room in the American century for Jim Crow. The times urge new militancy upon the democratic attitude. Tomorrow's democracy discriminates against discrimination. Its charter won't include the freedom to end freedom. What is described as a feeling against some races can't be further respected. Feeling is a ninnyish, mincing way of saying something ugly. But the word is good enough for race hate when we add that it's a feeling of guilt. Race hate isn't human nature. Race hate is the abandonment of human nature. But this is true. We hate whom we hurt, and we mistrust whom we betray. There are minority problems simply because minority races are often wronged. Race hate, distilled from the suspicions of ignorance, takes its welcome from the impotent and the godless, comforting these with hellish parodies of what they've lost. Arrogance to take the place of pride. Contempt to occupy the spirit emptied of the love of man. There are alibis for the phenomena, excuses, economic and social, but the brutal fact is simply this. Where the racist lie is acceptable, there is corruption. Where there is hate, there is shame. The human soul receives race hate only in the sickness of guilt. The Indian, the red Indian, is on our American conscience. The Negro is on our conscience. The Chinese and the Mexican American are on our conscience. The Jew is on the conscience of Europe, but our neglect gives us communion in that guilt, so that there dances even here the lunatic specter of anti-Semitism. This is deplored, but it must be fought, and the fight must be won. The race haters must be stopped. The lynchings must be stopped. No matter who's going to be governor of Georgia, the murders in Monroe must be avenged. Gene Talmadge may call it foreign meddling, but the governor-elect, who you remember campaigned on the Bilbo platform of race hate, needs to be told that all the states in the Union and all the people in them are concerned, immediately, personally concerned, when a mob forms in the sovereign privacy of Georgia. The mob said it was taking care of things in its own way. Well, then, we're going to have to take care of the mob in our own way. Those who take the law into their own hands are going to learn about some laws. We'll tie their hands. We'll write those laws and we'll enforce them. To do him justice, old Gene went and issued himself a statement. After the killings in Monroe were public knowledge, he said the killings were regrettable. But old Gene's made it plenty clear. He doesn't figure any foreigner's got the right to poke around and ask embarrassing questions. I am sending old Gene a copy of the Don sermon on the tolling bell, but I don't suppose he'll get the point. The point is, of course, that no man, even Gene Talmadge, is an island entire of itself. The point, of course, is that even Georgia is a piece of the continent, the American continent. And if a clod be washed away by the sea, or if a colored man and his wife are murdered on a dusty country road, America is the less. And then there's the soldier in the hospital. The blind soldier. The soldier says he was blinded. And the mayor and the chief of police in the place where the soldier says it happened are most indignant with me for repeating what he said and swore to. The Times the other day was full of their official protests, sent under seal all the way up to New York City from within the inviolable borders of Aiken County in South Carolina. My investigators are still hard at work on the case. If the soldier was wrong about the place, I'm going to do something about it. But if he isn't wrong about his eyes, he lost them, I'm going to do something about that. All the affidavits from all the policemen in the world won't protest his eyes back in his head. Somebody who called himself an officer of the law beat that boy with a stick until he lost his sight. Now that somebody is nobody. He's vanished. He's never been heard of. He hasn't any name. Well, he's going to be heard of. The blind soldier has my promise of that. That somebody is going to be named. Editorials and lots of newspapers and lots of people are writing me to demand to know what business it is of mine. God judge me if it isn't the most pressing business I have. The blind soldier fought for me in this war. The least I can do now is fight for him. I have eyes. He hasn't. I have a voice on the radio. He hasn't. I was born a white man. And until a colored man is a full citizen like me, I haven't the leisure to enjoy the freedom that colored man risked his life to maintain for me. I don't own what I have until he owns an equal share of it. Until somebody beats me and blinds me, I am in his debt. And so I come to this microphone not as a radio dramatist, although it pays better, not as a commentator, although it's safer to be simply that. I come in that boy's name and in the name of all who in this land of ours have no voice of their own. I come with a call for action. This is a time for it. I call for action against the cause of riots. I know that to some ears, even the word action has a revolutionary twang, and it won't surprise me if I'm accused in some quarters of inciting to riot. Well, I'm very interested in riots. I'm very interested in avoiding them. And so I call for action against the cause of riots. Law is the best action, the most decisive. I call for laws, then, prohibiting what moral judgment already counts as lawlessness. American law forbids a man the right to take away another's right. It must be law that groups of men can't use the machinery of our republic to limit the rights of other groups, that the vote, for instance, can't be used to take away the vote. It's in the people's power to see to it that what makes lynchings and starts wars is dealt with, not by well-wishers, but by policemen, and I mean good policemen. Oh, for several generations, maybe there'll be men who can't be weaned away from the fascist vices of race hate. That we should deny such men responsibility in public affairs exactly as we deny responsibility to the wretched victims of the drug habit. There are laws against peddling dope. There can be laws against peddling race hate. That every man has a right to his own opinion is an American boast, but race hate is not an opinion, it's a phobia. It isn't a viewpoint. Race hate is a disease. In a people's world, the incurable racist has no rights. He must be deprived of influence in a people's government. He must be segregated, as he himself would segregate the colored and Semitic peoples, as we now segregate the leprous and the insane. Anything very big is very simple. If there's a big race question, there's a big answer to it, and a big answer is simple, like the word no. This is my proposition, that the sin of race hate be solemnly declared a crime. What makes this difficult is the conservative fear of raising issues. Well, let's admit that this fear is often no more sinister than an honest dread of going to the dentist, but let's respect the effectiveness of reactionary manipulations of that fear, which is the fear of anarchy and revolution. It is put to wicked use against the same general welfare conservative opinion seeks to protect. Forced to acknowledge Hitler's enmity, conservatives are loath to admit that even as he surrendered in Europe, he succeeded in America. Let conservatives evaluate the impudent candor of fascism in Argentina today and be reminded that the heroic survival of our liberty is no proof of its immortality. Our liberty has every day to be safe from marauders whose greed is for all things possessed by the people. Care of these possessions is the hope of life on this planet. They are living things. They grow, these fair possessions of democracy. And nothing but death can stop that growth. Let the yearners for the past, the willfully childish, learn now the facts of life, the first of which is the fact of that growth. In our hemisphere, the growing has begun, but only just begun. America can write her name across this century, and so she will if we, the people, brown and black and red, rise now to the great occasion of our brotherhood. It will take courage. It calls for the doing of great deeds, which means the dreaming of great dreams. Giving the world back to its inhabitants is too big a job for the merely practical. The architects of freedom are always capable of hope. The lawmakers of true democracy are true believers. They believe quite simply in the people, in all of them. Only the devout deserve the trust of government, for only the devout can face the unimaginable vistas of man's destiny. God grant them steadfast hope and the rest of us enduring patience. For we must not expect from any leadership a shiny, ready-made millennium in our time. No one of us will live to see a blameless peace. We strive and pray and die for what will be here when we're gone. Our children's children are the ancestors of a free people. We send our greetings ahead of us to them. To history yet unmade, our greetings. To the generations sleeping in our loins. Be of good heart. The fight is worth it. That just about means that my time is up. When my time's up, it's time for me to say goodbye and to invite you please to join me at the same time, at the same station, next week. Until then, thanking you for your attention, I remain as always, obediently yours.
This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
This is Orson Welles speaking. A motion picture in which I play a part was scheduled for a couple of days running last week in Aiken, South Carolina. But the film was banned. Well, I'm used to being banned. I've been banned by whole governments. The Nazis in Germany have banned me, and the fascists of Italy and Spain have banned me. Here at home, the merest mention of my name is forbidden by Mr. Hearst to all his subject newspapers. But To be outlawed by an American city is a new experience. The movie in question is neither controversial nor obscene, but I am in it, and for the taste of Aiken, that makes any movie too offensive to be endured. Not only was the actual celluloid driven out of the city limits as with a fiery sword, but in defense of civic sensitivities and to protect the impressionable of Aiken's youth from the shock of my name and likeness, a detachment of police officers working under the direction of the city council itself solemnly tore down such posters as the local theater manager had been rash enough to put up by way of advertisement, and burnt same, together with all printed matter having reference to me, in a formal bonfire in the public streets. I'm also informed that I've been somewhat less officially hanged in effigy, and while I have an apology to offer Aiken, it's been suggested that I would be ill-advised to deliver it in person. Since I brought to your attention the case of Isaac Woodard, the case has grown into an issue of the most heated popular concern. It deserves all the national interest it's getting. Isaac Woodard is the veteran whose eyes were beaten out of his head by a policeman in the streets of a place in South Carolina that Isaac Woodard thought was Aiken. He said so in an affidavit, and when I read his affidavit on this program, the mayor of Aiken, the chief of police, and others, subsequently preoccupied with the public burning of my name and picture, sent affidavits of their own protesting innocence. My problem was the choice of affidavits. The boy had been blinded. That was the one clear, brutal fact, and I stuck to that with a promise to Aiken's officialdom that I would apologize for publishing the veteran's testimony when and if my investigators could show a decent doubt. The records were amazingly brief. The policeman who delivered Woodard to the hospital was not named. This is most unusual. The place where the attack occurred was not mentioned in the report. This is almost unheard of. But my investigators, the investigators of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the investigators of the FBI, have together narrowed down the search to the town of Batesburg, some 19 miles from Aiken. And this morning comes word that the search has been narrowed still further. I have before me wires and press releases to the effect that a policeman of Batesburg, a man by the name of Shaw, or Shore, or Shull, it is given 3 different ways here. The flash is just before us. Chief L.L. Shaw, pronounce it however you wanted, or want to, has admitted that he was the police officer who blinded Isaac Woodard, 30 miles from Aiken, in South Carolina. This is in Batesburg. I'll give you a few more of the facts. He's corroborated an Army statement, has Police Chief Shull or Shaw, that ex-serviceman Isaac Woodard Jr. was struck on the head with a blackjack. Chief Shull or Shaw says he was called to a bus one night last February to arrest Woodard, who, and I'm reading from a press association, he said was drunk. Shaw claimed to have hit Woodard across the head when Woodard tried to take away his blackjack. He added that the blow may have landed in the veteran's eyes. Shull or Shaw, the police chief, described the eyes as swollen the next day when Woodard was fined in the Recorder's Court, and said he then drove Woodard to a veterans hospital at a doctor's suggestion. Now, you'll remember from the affidavit and from further reports of our investigators that Woodard said he'd been offered liquor after he was attacked by the police, which he refused. And investigators of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples have discovered 3 other occupants of that bus, all of whom claim in affidavits that Woodard was not drunk, nor was he drinking. Woodard, you remember, appealed for medical aid. And also, according to the UP, Shaw or Shore or Shaw brands these stories as lies. He has volunteered no information for this. He was unearthed by investigation. Well, the good citizens of Aiken must be surely so glad to hear this that my apology, tendered herewith and as per promise, most abjectly, will come as merely incidental comfort. Batesburg, unlike Aiken, has turned out to be to blame. The search is narrowed down. We're getting close to the truth. We have the admission of a man that he was the officer whom I called X. Well, I would like to remind Officer X, otherwise known as Shull or Shaw, of another promise
promise I made to the blinded Isaac Woodard. If Chief Shull or Shaw is listening to me now, and it's more than possible that he is, it gives me pleasure to repeat that promise. Officer X, we know your name now. Now that we've found you out, we'll never lose you. If they try you for your crime, I am going to watch the trial, Chief Shull. If they jail you, I'm going to wait for your first day of freedom. You won't be free of me. I want to see who's waiting for you at the prison gates. I want to know who will acknowledge that they know you. I'm interested in your future. I will take note of all your destinations. Assume another name, and I will be careful that the name you would forget is not forgotten, Officer Shull or Shaw, police chief of the city of Batesburg. I will find means to remove from you all refuge. You can't get rid of me. We have an appointment. You and I. And only death can cancel it. Our scene changes now to the sovereign state of Texas. They're holding a little election. They held it. It was so close they're going to have a runoff. It's nothing important. It's just a governorship at stake. It's nothing to be excited about. It's just whether we're going to have a democratic education and freedom in Texas or not. It's nothing to be concerned about. Just a matter of who will control the Democratic delegation from Texas, the next Democratic National Convention. Of course, there's some people in Texas who are excited. Old Jesse Jones and the oil interests are very head up. So are the railroad people. They've poured $500,000 cash onto the barrelhead. They want to elect a man they can trust. The man they can trust is named Buford Jester. He's the railroad commissioner at the present time, so naturally the railroad people are backing him. Old Jesse Jones hates Harry Truman and Henry Wallace, so he doesn't want Jester's opponent, a Truman-Wallace man, to win. On the other side of the fence is an avowed New Dealer, Homer Rainey, Dr. Homer Rainey, who knows wherever he speaks. He was president of the University of Texas just a little while back when the big money boys ganged up and knocked him out of his job. You remember there was something very close to rioting among the students, but Rainey's out. So now Rainey is running for governor with money still piled up on the opposite side of the fence. Mr. Jester is spending money in great lumps, and herein hangs a tale. One of the mediums Mr. Jester is using is a recently organized public relations and advertising firm named Watson Associates of Dallas, Texas. I have a photostat of the registration certificate of Watson Associates filed with the county clerk in Dallas, Texas on March 14th, 1946 at 3:06 p.m. It shows that the first name listed of those who swore they will conduct the business of Watson Associates is that of a very interesting gentleman named Philip E. Fox of Dallas, Texas. Now, I am particularly interested in Mr. Fox because of the fact that he is now one of candidate Buford Jester's advisors and aides. And if Mr. Jester becomes governor of Texas, he'll give a lot of power to those who helped elect him. So who is Philip E. Fox? Philip E. Fox is an ex-convict. Now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. Everyone is entitled to a fair chance. But Mr. Philip E. Fox was convicted of a crime which, for the moment, I'm not permitted to name on this radio program, but I promise to name it next week when I can show the lawyers gathered here my proof for the contention. Philip E. Fox was convicted of this nameless crime on December 22nd, 1923 in Atlanta, Georgia. Even that is forgivable, perhaps, although it isn't usually considered very nice to have ex-cons and convicted, I can't name the crime, working for you in a political campaign. But there's one more X about Philip E. Fox of Dallas, Texas, which interests me even more. Philip E. Fox is the former publicity director of the Ku Klux Klan. Philip E. Fox was editor of the Klan's official publication, The Nighthawk. In fact, the murder excuse me, I should never have said that word, for which Fox, it is claimed, went to jail, involved his shooting an attorney for an opposing faction of the Ku Klux Klan. This is the same Philip E. Fox who is vigorously assisting in the campaign to elect big money Buford Jester as governor of the sovereign state of Texas. I thought the voters of Texas might like to know about these things. Well, scene changes again. This time it's Washington. And we find ourselves in the Statler Hotel on the 9th floor. Clean, cool room. A phone is ringing. The man who rented the room has just opened the door when he hears the annoying rumble. He answers something like this. Yes, Morris, this is dash dash. I'm just back from the State Department. Of course, I'd be glad to tell you all about what happened. Sure, come on up. The speaker was one of the 6 American members of the Anglo-American Palestine Commission. He hung up the phone, turned to the newspaper man who'd come upstairs with him and swore bitterly. Those poor, miserable people, he said, having to duck around corners all the time, pleading for information like they live behind barbed wire. Why does the world have to be like this? Why must the fate of millions of people be settled in star chamber proceedings? Why are those striped pants diplomats so determined to reduce the Jews to the status of second-class citizenship? And the newspaper man sat there coldly in the hotel room, a little cynically. He'd heard visitors to Washington talk like this before, but rarely with such bitterness. And the citizen turned statesman was mad clean through. He resumed his outburst. You know, there were 10 of us sitting in that room. There wasn't a Jew among us, just the acting Secretary of State, Dean Acheson, Henry Grady, the 2 men just back from London who tried to sell Europe's Jews into the partition ghetto in Palestine, and we 6, the American members of the Anglo-American Commission. It was ghastly the way the State Department tried to rationalize it. They were looking for an out. We 6 men had spent 3 months studying the issue. 6 Englishmen appointed by the British cabinet were also on the commission. We were unanimous in our findings. We agreed perfectly. Even the British went along on every single point. That's how obvious the Palestine situation is. We all went to London together. We heard weeks of testimony here. Then we went to Palestine and heard the Jews tell their story, and we heard the Arabs tell their story, and we were still unanimous. Now the State Department, fawning over the British Foreign Office, is trying to sell us out. Man settles down in his chair, lights a cigarette. Newspaper man takes notes. The voice continues. One of the members of our commission is Billy Phillips. You may have heard of him. He's been a diplomat for years, a State Department man for decades, but he's an honest man. He was an ambassador until recently. He was an ambassador to India and minister to London. When he heard the British Foreign Office proposal, he was violent. When he heard we were thinking of accepting it, do you know what he asked? He asked, how long, Mr. Acheson, does the State Department plan to continue as a tail of the British kite? Of course, this is all off the record, concluded the news source. Of course, replied the newspaper man. Of course, says Orson Welles, who got this story from the newspaper man. It's all off the record. Let's let the people sell the people for oil. Let them sell people for alliances and bases in the Middle East, of course. But let's keep it off the record. I wonder if we should. The word from Paris is unhappy. More of that next week. I think I have just time for now to read you a letter. Before I do, I'd just like to make this comment about international organization, though. I do think that we ought to stop giving up hope every day when we read about what's happening in Paris. I think we ought to realize that the best hope for international organization, the way the world is run nowadays, is the separate, selfish need of every nation for world peace. We mustn't expect a shiny, ready-made millennium in our time. Well, here's the letter, dear Mr. Wells. Some women would bake you a cake or knit you a necktie, but here's a poem, and it's from Dorothy Littlewort, who I see lives in Buffalo, and I liked her poem, and I'm going to read it because I just have time for it. It says, for Orson Welles. There is no cozy warmth about this shame, as one might feel who shyly blushed at praise. There is a bitter, cold, consuming flame, a knowledge we must live with all our days. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. I hold these truths to be self-evident. There is no incantation will prevent the murder of a black man, or restore to him his pride, or give him back his sight. Words are but pebbles on a homemade sling against this wickedness, but I will fling them ceaselessly with all my little might. It is some comfort that your arm can bring the broadsword of a champion to the fight. Thank you, Dorothy Littlewort, for that poem. Thank you for letting me read it. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for letting me join you. And please let me join you again next week, same time, same station. Until then, I remain, as always, obediently yours.
This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.
This is Orson Welles speaking. The place was Batesburg. Isaac Woodard thought it happened in Aiken. He was wrong. I've repeatedly explained Woodward's mistake and repeatedly apologized. But I broadcast his affidavit. Now the city of Aiken, having banned my movies, burned the posters in the streets, and hanged me in effigy, is threatening, believe it or not, to sue me for the sum of $2 million. Well, if I had all that money, honestly, I wouldn't mind owing it to Aiken for the pride of having finally put the blame where it belongs. The blame belongs, as I say, in Batesburg, South Carolina. It was Monday, February 13th, 1946. A minister and several workmen saw the police chief of Batesburg and a highway patrolman pouring buckets of water over the head and body of a soldier who had been arrested the night before. What the policemen were washing away was blood. And between each bucket, they stopped and asked the soldier, "Can you see yet?" Each time, the soldier answered no. The soldier was a Negro. We know now that his name is Isaac Woodard, and that the police chief had beaten him the day before and blinded him with a blackjack. When I stumbled on the story several months later and brought it to public attention on this program, the name of the guilty policeman was unknown, and it looked as though it always would be. I promised to get that name. I have it now. The minister and the workmen provided our investigators with one clue, and there were other clues. All led to a single man. All clues led to Mr. M.L. Shull, chief of police in Batesburg, South Carolina. Now we have him. And we won't let him go. I promised I'd hunt him down. I have. I gave my word I'd see him unmasked. I have unmasked him. I'm going to haunt Police Chief Shull for all the rest of his natural life. Mr. Shull is not going to forget me. And what's more important, I'm not going to let you forget Mr. Shull. Now, here's a letter. It goes like this. Well, Mr. Wells, you've just lost yourself an ardent fan. That little speech you made on the radio about that Negro got his eyes poked out, did it? You don't know a thing about this case, and I'm quite sure I heard the correct side of the story, being as I live in the very state in which it happened, and proud of it. But it seems that the Yankees always have to pick on somebody about something, and especially the South. Well, I'm going to put you wise for once. If the North would let the South alone a while and not try to bully them, everything would soon turn out just right for everybody concerned. We want the Negro to have a fair chance. We don't believe that the two races should mix, however, but it seems that the North is trying its darndest to make a mulatto nation of the whole South. Well, it isn't going to work. I believe that we would all die fighting, men and women side by side, before we would let a calamity like this happen to the glorious homeland of gallant men and their women who have certain well-founded beliefs and never take anything from anybody. Now to get back to that story. I've been around associating with a policeman around abouts, and I happen to know that the Negro who received the eye injury was extremely insolent, very unruly, tried to make a getaway from a police officer. Seems you all want to give the Negro a better chance than you would a white man. And, my dear man, I shall present a startling fact to you. The policeman in question did not cause the eye injury to the Negro. It was due to a fight the Negro had with another Negro. And he is trying to put the blame on the officer so he will draw a pension. Think that over, Mr. Orson Welles. Doubtless you have lost quite a few fans from that little dramatic speech you made, so full of emotion and tragic tears for the man. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Signed, your former fan. Well, we've been getting a lot of those anonymous letters since we broke the Isaac Woodard case in this program. Let this answer them all. Dear former fan, you say the North is bullying the South, and if the Yankees would stop always picking on somebody for something, everything would turn out just right for everybody concerned. I'm afraid you're missing the point. Batesburg isn't another battlefield of the Civil War. The sides contending over the scandal of Isaac Woodard aren't the blue and the gray. They are the right and the wrong. And on your side of the Mason-Dixon line, as on mine, most of the people are on the right side of that argument. Of course you're proud to live in South Carolina. You ought to be. But I think you'll find that most of your neighbors in South Carolina are ashamed of Mr. M.L. Shull, the police chief who beat out the Negro soldier's eyes with his blackjack. I'm proud to live in America, but I'm ashamed of Chief Shull and his blackjack. I'd be ashamed of him if I was a citizen of Tibet. Isaac Woodard was not involved in a conspiracy to make a mulatto nation of the South. He was just taking a bus trip to Winsboro to meet a young woman who belongs to his race and who bears his name. But Isaac Woodard never got to see his wife. He'll never see her. Never. Isaac Woodard is blind. Why? Because the North is bullying the South? And my dear former fan, your startling fact about the eye injury, those are your words, eye injury, being the work of another Negro is meaningless in the face of Chief Shull's own confession. He did it himself. And even Chief Shull doesn't claim he was defending the sanctity of white womanhood. Even Chief Shull doesn't claim he was keeping Isaac Woodard from marrying his sister. Well, that's enough of that for now. We'll come back to Mr. Shull next week, and the week after that. The week after that. My time remaining is dedicated to a man whose name we'll never know. Before the year now generally called Munich, perhaps a season or so earlier, there was a treasure hunt in Paris. Please visualize the celebrants not as Parisians, but as notables, as they mostly were, of a very publicly gay wing of international society. You may know that a treasure hunt proposes a number of unlikely quests, and when the list is imaginative, it can be fun. Here was a treasure hunt for the history of the game. There was no limit to the mad invention of it. One item was something unmentionably intimate, that's all I know about it, a possession of the mistress of a cabinet minister. Another prize was a legal certificate of marriage binding between a couple who hadn't considered any such solemnity. There were a dozen more of these treasures, all as extraordinary, and for a climax, nothing less than a cigar, still smoking, lit at the flame which burns forever by the tomb of the unknown soldier. Now, decency expects of a tomb that it guard for the lifetime of stone what was once the habitation of the spirit of man. The conscience of the world defends the memorial of those who, in the last war as in this, died for peace. You agree we catch a glimpse here of something worse than mere bad taste, picnicking on an old grave, something perverse, wickeder than any casual defilement of God's image. Only another bad piece could make anyone laugh at a dead soldier again. Of course, whoever lit his cigar from that flame may have thought the unknown soldier wasn't anybody he knew. It's true there isn't anybody in particular to mourn for the man who is buried there, so everybody mourns for him. The mocker can't have known that he profaned his brother's grave, but how could he forget? The sense of man's brotherhood is all that can sustain the human spirit for the loss of God, and this man had no God. By what did he live? The loss of faith is the condition of despair, and the alternative to despair is the worship of Caesar. What's sure is that the mocking of sacrifice cannot survive elsewhere, but in that evil climate of the soul where fascism prepares its subjects. Very probably the man with the cigar was one of these prefabricated pagans who rode the joyless carousel of the 20s and 30s, one of those, you know, who doubted if anything is ever really bad or really good. If the man with the cigar is alive, he may have changed his mind. It's possible he found something bad enough to fight. He may even think that something good is real enough to defend. I think we know these things, but never say them enough. Bad and good have been at war, God knows, since the first morning of the world. Men do the fighting. If they didn't, this planet would be nothing better than a zoo. Faith is the tinder of man's greatness. So long as he shields it from despair, he's going to keep the gift of fire. There is one choice, no more. One choice and no exemptions. Those who believe this recent war can be the last are those who won it. Those who lost suppose that war itself breeds without cure in the nature of all peoples. These are the same who fattened on this war. They are the same who plan the next one. The slaves doubt their kind's capacity to learn and change. The slavers curb with doubt the people's righteous will to abide by its own laws. They are all the same. We have this to be glad of. These who are of little faith, the blasphemers, experts in chaos, or the sick in spirit, These who can't, who won't affirm the plain, magnificent decency of human folk, all such on this our brightening world are rallied in the shadows now under the banners of despair. Defeat is their profession and their destination. Victory rises even today before the men of faith. This last war might have been the last war. If it was, and only if it was, we'll know the world's first peace. But let's have an end to the old stalemates and manipulations. The people want a government of all their nations, the chance to know each other better, to visit neighbors and make friends. They want open borders. They want everything printed in the newspaper so that they know whether they like what's going on or whether they don't. They're tired, the people are, of secrets and spies. They're tired of striped pants. The people want their own diplomats, and all these things the people are going to have unless they're cheated out of them, Paris notwithstanding. If free men who fought for freedom aren't going to be allowed to destroy fascism, if anything that looks like fascism is suffered to sit down among us, the cynics will be right again. An ordered world where everybody's free to prosper and improve is still a far-off dream. The Fuhrer gave his sway 1,000 years. His doom is sure. He lost. But those who fought him know they may not win. That 1,000 years of his was a good guess. At least 1,000 years waits on the chance of another war. Another war means worse than the leveling of all the cities. We know that. It means retreat, a setback longer than the quarter of a century wasted since the unknown soldier died for us. 1,000 years is a long march. We are the ancestors of unknown soldiers who must go that bloody length again, unless we who are weary of marching go on marching. Forward is the way, forward, beyond peace, on into the free world which depends on it. A free world means just that. We must refuse all substitutes. A free world depends on that refusal. Liberals have a lot to say nowadays about the danger of reaction. Reaction is no danger, it's a certainty. Maybe it won't amount to much. Maybe it's going to be a tidal wave. Anyway, the answer isn't written in the stars. It's up to the democratic man. He must stand fast now. This time he daren't lose, or nothing will be left. Nothing even to start with. And they'll build a new war monument, not to the unknown soldier, but to the unknown cause. Maybe they'll keep an enigmatic little flame alight there to show where freedom died. But nobody will start a cigar on that sepulcher. It wouldn't even be funny. The alternative, of course, is civilization, a bookish and uneasy word, that civilization. Our languages will bear us fairer names for it when we've struggled closer to what we would describe. Peace, then, will go as unremarked as the free air. Peace, after all, is no more than the victory of the farm over the wilderness. As probable as that, no more hard-earned. But never think our work is over when we've won that peace. We'll know better. And even when the world is free, we'll know we've just begun. Here it is. Here is the peace, we'll say. Standing in the midst of it, like plowmen, content with the good order of their fields. Standing together, since mankind will be every man's family when the tools of war are put away for good. Here is peace. Here is peace, we'll say to each other, proudly, undismayed. Nobody will confuse it with the millennium. Then the abundance of the human spirit will be ready for harvest. And even the children will see that final peace is merely history's first important date. Now I see my time's up. Thank you for letting me come to call. Please make a date for next Sunday at this same time. Until then, I remain as always, obediently yours.
This is ABC, the American Broadcasting Company.